Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Cup of Jonah. Hope you guys had a great day yesterday. So today, as you know, well, of course, before we get into it, remember to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Today, we're going to look at that God is infinite. So we're going to ask the question if God is infinite. So yesterday, as you know, and the day before, we looked at if God was one. And then now this one is a little bit longer of a chapter as well, but not too bad. We should be able to get it done today. So, that God is infinite. Since, as the philosophers teach, the infinite accompanies quantity, infinite cannot be attributed to God on the grounds of multitude. For we have shown that there is only one God, and that no composition of parts or accidents is found in him. Nor again, according to continuous quantity, can God be called infinite, since we have shown that he is incorporeal. It remains then to investigate whether, according to spiritual magnitude, it befits God to be infinite. We speak of spiritual magnitude with reference to 2 points, namely power and the goodness or completeness of one's own nature. For something is said to be more or less white according to the mode in which its whiteness is completed. The magnitude of its power, likewise, is measured from the magnitude of its actions or its works. Of these magnitudes, one follows the other. For from the fact that something is in act, it is active, and hence the mode of the magnitude of its power is according to the mode in which it is completed in this act. Thus it remains that spiritual beings are called great according to the mode of their completion. Augustine himself says that in beings that are great but not in bulk, to be greater is the same as to be better. We must therefore show that God is infinite according to the mode of this sort of magnitude. The infinite here will not be taken in the sense of privation, as in the case of dimensive or numerical quantity. For this quantity is of a nature to have a limit, so that such things are called infinites according as there is removed from them the limits they have by nature, which means that in their case, the infinite designates an imperfection. But in God, the infinite is understood only in a negative way, because there is no terminus or limit to his perfection. He is supremely perfect. It is thus that the infinite ought to be attributed to God. For everything that according to its nature is finite is determined to the nature of some genus. God, however, is not in any genus. His perfection, as was shown above, rather, contains the perfection of all the genera. God is, therefore, infinite. Again, every act inhering in another is terminated by that in which it inheres, since what is in another is in it according to the mode of the receiver. Hence, an act that exists in nothing is terminated by nothing. Thus, if whiteness were self-existing, the perfection of whiteness in it would not be terminated so as to have whiteness whatever can be had of the perfection of whiteness. But God is act, in no way existing in another, for neither is he a form in matter, as we have proved, nor is he being inhere, nor does his being inhere in some form of nature, since he is his own being, as was proved above. It remains then that God is infinite. Furthermore, in reality we find something that is potency alone, namely prime matter, something that is act alone, namely God, as was shown above, and something that is act and potency, namely the rest of things. But since potency is said relatively to act, it cannot exceed act either in a particular case or absolutely. Hence, since prime matter is infinite in its potentiality, it remains that God, who is pure act, is infinite in his actuality. Moreover, an act is all the more perfect by as much as it has less of potency mixed with it. Hence, every act with which potency is mixed is terminated in its perfection. But as is shown above, God is pure act without any potency, He is therefore infinite. Again, considered absolutely, being is infinite, since there are infinite and infinite modes in which it can be participated. If, then, the being of something is finite, what must be that being must be limited by something other than that being must be limited by something other that is somehow its cause. But there can be no cause of the divine being, for God is a necessary being through himself. Therefore, his being is infinite, and so is he. Then, too, what has a certain perfection is the more perfect as it participates in that perfection more fully. But there cannot be a mode of perfection, nor is one thinkable, by which a given perfection is possessed more fully than it is possessed by the being that is perfect through its essence, and whose being is its goodness. In no way, therefore, is it possible to think of anything better or more perfect than God. Hence, God is infinite in goodness. Our intellect, furthermore, extends to the infinite in understanding, and a sign of this is that, given any finite quantity, our intellect can think of a greater one. But this ordination of the intellect would be in vain unless an infinite intelligent reality existed. There must therefore be some infinite intelligible reality, which must be the greatest of beings. This we call God. God is therefore infinite. Again, an effect cannot transcend its cause, but our intellect can only be from God, who is the first cause of all things. Our intellect, therefore, cannot think of anything greater than God. If then it can think of something greater than every finite thing, it remains that God is not finite. There is also the argument that an infinite power cannot reside in a finite essence. For each thing acts through its form, which is either its essence or a part of the essence, whereas power is the name of the principle of action. But God does not have a finite active power, for he moves in an infinite time, which can be done only by an infinite power, as was proved above. It remains then that God's essence is infinite. This argument, however, is according to those who posit the eternity of the world. If we do not posit it, there is all the greater confirmation for the view that the power of God is infinite. For each agent is more powerful in act according as it reduces to act a potency more removed from act, just as a greater power is needed to heat water and air. But that which in no way exists, is infinitely distant from act, nor is it in any way in potency. If then the world was made after previously not being at all, the power of its maker must be infinite. This argument holds in proving the infinity of the divine power, even according to those who posit the eternity of the world. For they acknowledge that God is the cause of the substance of the world, though they consider this substance to be everlasting. They say that God is the cause of an everlasting world in the same way as a foot would have been the cause of an imprint if it had been pressed on sand from all eternity. If we adopt this position according to our previous argumentation, it follows that the power of God is infinite. For whether God procured things in time as we hold, or from all eternity according to them, nothing can be in reality that God did not produce. For God is the universal source of being. Thus God produced the world without the supposition of any pre-existent matter or potency. Now we must gather the proportion of an active power according to the proportion of a passive potency. For the greater the potency that pre-exists or is presupposed, by so much the greater active power will it be brought to actual fulfillment. It remains, therefore, that since a finite power produces a given effect by presupposing the potency of matter, the power of God, which presupposes no potency, is infinite, not finite. Thus, so is his essence infinite. Each thing, moreover, is more enduring according as its cause is more efficacious. Hence, that being whose duration is infinite must have been from a cause of infinite efficaciousness. But the duration of God is infinite, for we have shown above that he is eternal. Since then he has no other cause of his being than himself, he must be infinite. The authority of sacred scripture is witness to this truth, for the psalmist says, quote, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and of his greatness there is no end." End quote. The saying of the most ancient philosophers are likewise a witness to this truth. They all posited an infinite first principle of things, as though compelled by truth itself. Yet they did not recognize their own voice. They judged the infinity of the first principle in terms of a discrete quantity, following Democritus, who posited infinite atoms as the principles of things. Also Anaxagoras, who posited infinite similar parts as the principles of things. Or they judged infinity in terms of continuous quantity, following those who posited that the first principle of all things was some element or a confused infinite body. But since it was shown by the effort of later philosophers that there is no infinite body, given that there must be a first principle that is in some way infinite, we conclude that the infinite, which is the first principle, is neither a body nor a power in a body. All right, so you can see there's probably about a dozen different arguments in quick succession for the infinity of God, or you could say proofs of it, right? And whenever he does that, whenever he pulls from multiple chapters, it's to solidify, again, that the teacher that orders. So a lot of these things were kind of there already in seed form for us from past chapters. But when he does that and pulls, spends more time than just a chapter, than just a page or two on a concept, it's just underlining its importance and how we need to, that was a very disputed point in the past in philosophy. So he puts extra time in solidifying our understanding of why God must be infinite. But then also we're going to build on that, on this chapter specifically, in the future as well. So, and again, beautifully, he first gets there through reason, and then again ties it back to sacred scripture to show that this truth, which was accessible to reason, has already been revealed as well. And then also he shows how other philosophers in the past, other great thinkers in the past, were there. They understood part of it, but they had an admixture of error, and those he listed, right? The error of thinking that they understood that God had to be infinite, but they misunderstood the mode of that infinity, like it was some infinite number of particles or other similar errors. There's a book called History of Philosophy that walks through the development of philosophy and its treatment of the time leading up to Aristotle, and how each of these philosophers before Aristotle kind of each discovered a new piece and figured out a new piece in our knowledge as they kind of stepped up gradually to lay kind of a foundation for Aristotle to be as successful as he was in discovering and scientifically demonstrating many, many high truths and noble truths. So really beautiful to see it laid out like that. I'll see if I can find the reference, that book. It was nice to see how it kind of built up the art of philosophy, so to speak. Just kind of, you could see the evolution as it built up to Aristotle. Another thing that made Aristotle really successful in terms of the vast amount of sense knowledge that he had is, I don't know if most people realize this, but he was actually the tutor for Alexander the Great. So he was very close to Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, as he conquered the known world at the time, he would send live specimens or clips of some of the different plants. He would send different animals that are alive over to Aristotle, so that Aristotle could study them. And this is why Aristotle had knowledge of, like, hands-on information, knowledge of wildlife from around the world. Fascinating. So Aristotle had an advantage from that perspective over a lot of the philosophers that came before him, because, of course, as we know, all knowledge comes to us through our senses, as men, as rational animals, because that rationality sits in the seat of a body, so to speak. It's the form that intellect experiences the world through our bodies. We're limited to that intake, unlike the angels that are able to receive that intellectual information immediately. So, interesting stuff. But, all right, well, tomorrow, let's see where we're going tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to show that God is intelligent. And on from there, we'll talk about what he understands, what's the mode of his understanding. Does he understand himself? So it's pretty interesting. This is all, and then obviously, if you think about it, let me confirm this, but one would think because of the, because of the order of our knowledge and understanding, we know that the intellect is one, and then the will flows from the intellect as its appetite. So first, Aristotle's going to talk of the intellect of God. What's the object of the intellect of God? What does he know exactly? And then the subject of God's knowing, which is truth. Does God know it? How does he know it? Does he know us each individually? Does he know singulars or just infinite generalities? And then, yep, that's right. And then after he treats of the intellect, both in itself and in its object and its subject, then he'll move to the will, which is the appetite of the intellect, right? Whether or not God has a will. Does he will other things? Very interesting. So, there you have it. So, thank you for joining me today in Cup of Jonah. Again, don't forget to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Also, at Jonah Stormrider on YouTube. And, of course, Cup of Jonah on Spotify. But, anyways, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.